The morning light spilled gently through the dusty windows of the small white church on the edge of Willow Creek, Texas. The sun glowed warm and golden against the old wooden pews, casting long shadows across the aisle that had been decorated with cheap white ribbons and a few tired flowers. Everything was ready. The altar candles were lit, the organist waited quietly, and the guests whispered among themselves in excitement and curiosity. But there was one thing missing. The groom. Clara Jones stood at the front, hands clutching a small bouquet of daisies she had picked herself that morning. Her wedding dress, simple and a size too small, pinched at her waist, but she didn't care. She had sewn it by hand, stitching each piece with trembling hope. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Today was supposed to be the day everything changed, the day she stopped being the lonely girl who lived behind the diner, and became someone's wife. Someone's forever. Her mother wasn't there. She'd said it was too embarrassing, a fat girl in a wedding gown chasing a dream. Her friends had made excuses too. So it was mostly townsfolk, people who had come not out of love, but out of curiosity, to see if this unlikely wedding would actually happen. Minutes turned to half an hour. Then an hour. The whispers grew louder. Did he get lost? One woman murmured. I heard he ran off last night, another said, her tone sharp with pity. Poor thing, an old man sighed. Should have known. Boys like him don't marry girls like her. Clara heard every word. Each whisper stabbed through her like a blade, but she kept smiling, her lips trembling, her eyes locked on the church doors. Maybe he'd walk in late. Maybe his car broke down. Maybe love was real. But deep down, a small, honest voice inside her whispered the truth. He wasn't coming. The pastor, an old man with kind eyes and a wrinkled Bible, stepped closer. Miss Clara, would you like to wait a little longer? She looked at him, her throat tightening, but she refused to let tears fall. No, sir, she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied herself. I think we've waited enough. The guests began to shuffle, awkward and silent. Some stood, pretending to comfort her, others looked away, ashamed of their curiosity. The sound of the organ faded, and the only thing left was the quiet hum of the ceiling fan turning above. Clara looked down at her hands, still holding the bouquet. The flowers were wilting, petals falling one by one to the floor. She thought of all the nights she had spent dreaming of love, of someone looking at her like she mattered. But life had always been cruel that way. She wasn't the kind of girl men fought for. She wasn't the kind of girl anyone wrote songs about. Still, she smiled, a broken, gentle smile that came from somewhere deep in her heart. When she finally looked up, the pastor was still there, hesitant. I'm so sorry, child, he said softly. Clara shook her head. Don't be, sir. I should have known better. She looked around the small church, her voice growing steadier with each word. No one marries a fat girl, sir, but I can cook. The words hung in the air like smoke. A few guests gasped quietly. Some looked away. The pastor blinked, not knowing how to respond. But Clara wasn't bitter. She was tired, yes, but not angry. Her tone carried no hate, only a strange acceptance of how the world saw her. She took off her veil slowly, her fingers brushing the lace she had borrowed from a friend's wedding years ago. Her hair, slightly curled, framed her soft face as she turned toward the door. She walked down that long aisle, the hem of her dress dragging slightly, collecting dust. The sound of her steps echoed in the silence. Outside, the afternoon heat wrapped around her. The scent of wildflowers and dry earth filled the air. She stepped off the church steps and took a deep breath, the wind tugging gently at her veil as it slipped from her fingers and drifted away. It didn't matter. She was done waiting for people who didn't see her worth. Still, the pain was sharp. Every breath felt heavy in her chest. She thought about going home, taking off the dress, and pretending this day never happened. Maybe she'd cook something sweet. Pies always made her feel better. Maybe she'd take the job at the diner full-time. Maybe she'd forget what it felt like to dream. She sat on the small wooden bench near the church, bouquet resting beside her. The world around her was quiet except for the sound of cicadas and a few birds in the trees. The horizon stretched far and wide, endless fields under the golden Texas sun. She thought of all the things people had said about her over the years. How she was too heavy, too plain, too quiet. She had believed some of it, though she tried not to. She had built walls around herself made of kindness and humor, pretending their words didn't hurt. Now, sitting there alone in a white dress that had no meaning anymore, Clara felt small, but not defeated. She had survived worse. She straightened her shoulders, brushed a tear from her cheek, and whispered to herself, maybe I don't need saving. Maybe I just need to start over. As she looked out toward the dirt road that led away from the church, a small cloud of dust appeared in the distance, a truck, moving slow and steady. She didn't know it yet, but the man driving that truck was about to change her life forever. Inside the old Ford pickup was rancher Luke Carter, bringing milk to the church for a wedding reception that no longer needed it. He saw her sitting there in her wedding dress, alone, holding wilting flowers, and something in his chest tightened. He didn't know her name, but he saw her pain. He saw her strength. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, fate quietly shifted its course. Clara didn't look up right away. She just sat there, eyes on the horizon, unaware that her story wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The road wound through open pastures until it ended at a wooden archway that read, Hayes Ranch. The paint was faded, the boards cracked by sun and time, yet it stood proud against the horizon. Beyond it, the land stretched as far as Emma could see, rolling hills dotted with cattle, fences lined with weathered posts, and a big red barn that looked like it had stood there for generations. The pickup rattled down the dirt path, kicking up a cloud of golden dust that shimmered in the fading light. Emma sat stiff in her seat, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. Every bump in the road made her flinch. The man beside her hadn't spoken since they left the highway. He drove with steady calm, one hand resting on the wheel, his gaze fixed ahead as if the silence between them didn't bother him at all. When the truck finally stopped in front of a small farmhouse, she let out a shaky breath. The house wasn't big, but it looked solid, white paint peeling at the corners, a porch with a swing swaying softly in the wind, and a few toys scattered on the steps. It was the kind of place that spoke of work and quiet living, not of cruelty or fear. Still, Emma didn't move. She kept her eyes on her knees, waiting for the command she was certain would come next. But none came. The man shut off the engine, stepped out, and after a moment, opened her door. "You can come in," he said quietly, not looking at her directly. "You need food, rest." His voice was calm, not sharp or demanding, and that confused her even more. She hesitated, then climbed down carefully. Her legs trembled from exhaustion. The smell of hay and pine hit her nose, grounding her somehow. The crunch of gravel under her bare feet sounded too loud in the quiet evening. He walked ahead, pushing open the door and stepping inside. Warm light spilled from within. A simple kitchen, tidy but lived in, with a wooden table, a few chairs, and the faint scent of stew in the air. Emma lingered at the threshold, unsure if she was allowed to follow. "Come on," he said again without turning. "Food's still hot." She stepped in, clutching her bag like armor. The air inside was cooler, touched by the smell of soap and something faintly floral, laundry, maybe. The walls were decorated with photographs, horses, sunsets, and a small girl with blonde pigtails smiling up at a man she immediately recognized. The same eyes, the same quiet sadness. He noticed her gaze linger. "My daughter," he said simply, setting his hat on a hook near the door. "She's asleep. Don't worry, she's a light sleeper but a gentle one." Emma nodded quickly, unsure what to say. He motioned for her to sit at the table and ladled a bowl of stew into a cracked ceramic dish. He slid it toward her without a word. She stared at it, steam curling upward, the smell rich and inviting. It had been 2 days since she'd eaten a proper meal. Her stomach growled in protest, but shame held her back. "You don't have to be afraid to eat," he said, his voice steady. "I made plenty." She lifted the spoon, her hands shaking, and took a bite. The warmth filled her mouth and spread through her body like life itself returning. She ate slowly, afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. He said nothing, sitting across from her, his hands folded loosely, eyes thoughtful but distant. When she finally finished, she murmured, "Thank you." He nodded once. "Name's Ethan." "Emma," she whispered. A quiet fell between them again, but it wasn't as heavy as before. There was something in his stillness that felt different, not cold, just steady. She watched him stand, pour her a glass of water, and then point toward the hallway. "There's a guest room down the hall. Sheets are clean. You can lock the door if you want." The words almost broke her. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not with gentleness, not with respect. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. "I can work. I can clean, cook, whatever you need." Ethan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You don't owe me work," he said after a pause. "You needed help. That's all." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. No one had ever helped her without asking something in return. She didn't know what to do with kindness that came without a price. He noticed her hesitation but didn't push. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you can help with breakfast if you want." Emma nodded and rose slowly. The hallway felt long, lined with more photographs, the little girl again, growing older with each frame, and always Ethan beside her. His expression never changed much, but his eyes softened whenever she was near. There was love in those moments, quiet but unshakable. The guest room was small but clean, a single bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto the barn. She set her bag down carefully, unsure whether to sit or stand. The sheets smelled faintly of lavender and sun. It was the first real bed she'd seen in months. She turned the lock on the door and leaned against it, her body shaking. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed on the road now came freely. She cried without sound, covering her mouth with both hands. She wasn't sure if she was crying from relief, confusion, or fear that this safety wouldn't last. When she finally climbed into bed, the softness startled her. It felt too kind for someone like her. She lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of Ethan moving about, the clatter of dishes, the soft creak of floorboards. Then, silence. The kind of silence that didn't threaten but protected. Outside, the night wind whispered through the fields. A horse neighed softly in the distance. Somewhere in the next room, she heard a faint giggle, a child's voice, and Ethan's quiet, "Go back to sleep, sweetheart." That voice carried warmth that reached even through her locked door. Emma turned on her side, pulling the blanket up to her chin. For the first time in years, her body began to unclench, her breathing slow and even. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, if he would still be kind, if she could stay, or if she even deserved to, but for now, she let herself rest. When the morning sun filtered through the window, painting the room in soft gold, she woke to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. For a brief, fragile moment, she allowed herself to imagine that she wasn't a lost stranger anymore. That maybe this quiet ranch, with its gentle silence and honest air, could hold the beginning of something she thought she'd lost forever: peace. Light across miles of pasture and fence line. The Carter Ranch stretched as far as Clara could see, rolling hills dotted with cattle, a weathered red barn, and a white farmhouse that stood like a quiet guardian against the horizon. It smelled of hay, fresh earth, and something wild and free. Clara arrived in a borrowed truck, wearing a faded blue dress and carrying a small suitcase. The air was still cool, the kind of morning that made her feel awake in a way she hadn't in years. She hadn't expected to come. When Luke had offered her the job, she thought she'd laugh it off, go home, and try to forget the humiliation of yesterday. But something about his eyes, the quiet steadiness in them, stayed with her. It wasn't pity, it was something else. Respect, maybe. When she pulled up, Luke was already outside, fixing a broken fence post. He turned as he heard the engine, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and smiled. "Morning, Miss Jones." She smiled back shyly. "You really meant it, then?" "About the job." He nodded. "Sure did. Kitchen's yours if you want it. The boys'll be grateful, trust me." Clara stepped out of the truck and looked around. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly. Luke looked out toward the fields, hands resting on his hips. "It's home. Bit lonely sometimes, but it's honest." She could feel that honesty in the air, the kind that came from early mornings, hard work, and the kind of silence that didn't demand anything from you. Inside the ranch house, the kitchen looked like a storm had passed through. Pots and pans were scattered everywhere, the sink was full of burned pans, and the smell of old beans lingered stubbornly in the air. Clara laughed softly as she took it all in. "Well, you weren't exaggerating," she said. Luke chuckled. "Told you we needed saving." She rolled up her sleeves and got to work without another word. Within an hour, The kitchen smelled different, like butter melting on the stove, biscuits baking in the oven, and coffee brewing strong. Luke watched from the doorway, trying not to stare, but it was hard. The way she moved, calm and sure, like she belonged there already, it did something to him. When the ranch hands came in for breakfast, their faces lit up. "Smells like heaven," one of them said, grabbing a chair. Clara smiled shyly as she set the table. "There's plenty for everyone. Don't be shy." They ate like they hadn't had real food in months, laughing between bites, praising her biscuits and gravy like it was the finest thing they'd ever tasted. Luke sat quietly at the end of the table, watching her smile, watching how easily she fit into the space that had felt empty for so long. After breakfast, Clara started cleaning the kitchen, humming softly under her breath. Luke leaned against the doorway. "You don't have to do all that right now," he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "If I don't, you'll just burn it all again tomorrow," she teased lightly. He smiled. "Fair enough." As the days turned into weeks, Clara settled into a rhythm. She woke before dawn, cooked breakfast for the ranch hands, packed lunches for the field, and prepared dinner that made even the toughest cowboys sit up straighter at the table. The house began to feel alive again, music on the radio, the clatter of dishes, the warmth of conversation. Luke started finding excuses to be near the kitchen. Sometimes he'd stop by to refill his coffee, sometimes just to ask how her day was going. He'd lean against the counter, pretending to read the newspaper while sneaking glances at her. Clara noticed, of course. She wasn't used to being noticed, and every time she caught him looking, her heart stumbled in her chest. But she didn't say anything. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in suddenly. The sky darkened, and rain pounded against the tin roof. The ranch hands rushed to bring the cattle in, and Clara stood by the window, watching the storm with wide eyes. She'd always loved storms. The way the world went quiet between claps of thunder, the way rain washed everything clean. Luke came in, drenched and muddy, boots heavy with wet clay. "Cows are safe," he said, shaking his hat. "Coffee's on," she said, already pouring him a cup. He smiled gratefully, wrapping his hands around the mug. "You sure make this place feel different, Clara." She looked up, surprised. Different how? He thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "Warmer, I guess. Quieter, but in a good way. Used to be," this house just echoed. "Now it feels like home again." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. "I'm glad, Mr. Carter." He chuckled softly. "Luke. You can call me Luke." "All right," she said, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Luke." There was something tender in the way she said his name, something that made his heart beat faster. He didn't say anything, though. He just stood there, sipping his coffee, watching her as the rain fell against the windows. Over time, the small moments between them began to carry weight. When their hands brushed while passing a plate. When she laughed at one of his quiet jokes. When he walked her to her truck at the end of the day, lingering just a little longer before saying goodnight. The townspeople started talking, of course. "That rancher's got himself a lady cook," they said. Probably just out of pity. But Luke didn't care what they said. And Clara, though the words still stung, found that they didn't cut as deep as they used to. Because when she was at the ranch, none of it mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Luke found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the horizon. She had a cup of tea in her hands, the gentle steam curling into the air. He sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder. "You like it here?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I do. It's peaceful. Feels like the kind of place where a person can start over." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the soft curls falling loose around her face, the faint freckles on her cheeks, the quiet strength in her eyes. "You deserve that," he said. "A fresh start." She turned to meet his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something fragile and new. Then she smiled, small and real. "Thank you, Luke, for giving me a chance." He shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. You're the one who gave this place its heart back." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of warmth, of a connection neither of them could name yet. The crickets began to sing in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. The day faded into night, and for the first time in a long while, both of them felt like they weren't alone anymore. The air on the ranch carried the scent of autumn, dry grass, hay, and the faint sweetness of apples ripening on the lone tree near the barn. Mornings came cooler now, with mist drifting low across the fields, and the sun took its time rising over the horizon. Emma had been at the Hayes Ranch for weeks, though time seemed to move differently here, slow, gentle, like the world had finally stopped chasing her. Every morning she rose before the rooster crowed, made coffee, and watched Ethan and Lily feed the horses. She had begun to smile again without forcing it, to hum softly as she swept the porch or folded laundry. The bruises on her heart had not fully healed, but the ache had dulled, replaced by something tender and unfamiliar. Ethan had changed too, though he didn't notice it himself. He had started talking more, not much, but enough. He would tell her small things about the land, about how the fence needed fixing before winter, or how Lily loved to chase butterflies near the creek. He still carried his quietness like an old coat, but now it no longer shut the world out, it simply wrapped around the people he loved. Sometimes, when he looked at Emma across the dinner table, his eyes softened in a way that made her breath catch. One evening, as the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet, Emma found herself sitting on the porch steps, watching Lily chase a stray kitten through the tall grass. The little girl's laughter rang through the air like music, so pure it made Emma's throat tighten. Ethan was leaning against one of the porch beams, arms folded, watching them both with quiet pride. "She loves you," he said, his voice low. Emma blinked, turning toward him. "She's just kind, like her father." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "She's kind because she's seen kindness again." They fell into silence, the comfortable kind they both understood. The wind stirred the grass, carrying the sound of crickets and the faint creak of the barn door in the distance. The world felt safe in a way that still scared her. Safety was foreign. Safety meant she could lose it. After a long pause, she said softly, "I've been thinking I should go." Ethan's head turned slowly, his blue eyes steady on her face. "Go where?" "I don't know," she admitted, twisting her hands in her lap. "Maybe to the next town. Find work. Start over." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes darkened, a quiet hurt. "You've already started over." She shook her head. "This isn't mine, Ethan. This ranch, this life, it belongs to you and Lily. I can't keep taking your kindness. I don't deserve it." He stepped closer, the boards of the porch creaking under his boots. "You're not taking anything. You've given us more than you think." Her throat tightened. "I can't stay here forever. People like me, we don't belong in places like this." He crouched down in front of her, his hat casting a shadow across his face. "And what kind of place do you think you belong in?" She couldn't answer. Her voice broke before words could form. She'd spent so long being told what she was worth, so long believing it. Every instinct screamed that happiness like this was borrowed, temporary, something that would vanish if she reached for it too tightly. Ethan's gaze softened, and he said quietly, "Emma, when I found you on that road, you looked like someone who'd given up on the world. But every day since then, you've brought life back into this house. You helped Lily laugh again. You helped me remember what peace feels like. You think that's taking? No, that's giving." Tears blurred her vision. She shook her head, whispering, "I'm still broken, Ethan." He reached out, his hand hovering just above hers, not touching yet, as if asking permission. "So am I," he said. "But maybe broken people don't need fixing. Maybe they just need someone to walk beside them while they heal." That was when she started to cry. Not the quiet, hidden tears she shed before, but deep, shaking sobs that came from years of silence. Ethan didn't speak. He simply took her hand, holding it gently as if it were something precious. The warmth of his palm grounded her, reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. When she finally calmed, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving the ranch bathed in silver moonlight. Lily had fallen asleep on the grass, curled around the kitten, and the world was still except for the distant hum of crickets. Emma stood slowly, brushing her hands against her skirt. "I should pack," she whispered, though even as she said it, her voice trembled. Ethan rose too, looking at her steadily. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a kind of fierce tenderness that made her heart ache. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You don't have to run anymore," he said softly. Her breath caught. "I'm not running. I don't know how to stay." He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face with the gentlest touch. "Then let me teach you." Her heart felt like it might break under the weight of his words. The way he said them, not demanding, not pleading, just quietly certain, made her realize that staying wasn't weakness. It was courage. "Please, Ethan," she whispered, tears glistening again. "Don't make me a promise you can't keep." He shook his head. "I'm not promising anything," he said softly. "I'm asking you to come home." Something inside her shifted. The phrase echoed through her mind like a heartbeat, "Come home." No one had ever said those words to her. Home had always been a place of fear, not belonging. But the way Ethan said it, it wasn't a command. It was an invitation, a lifeline. Emma took a trembling breath. The night air was cool against her skin, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was freezing. She stepped closer, resting her forehead lightly against his chest. He didn't move, didn't pull her in, he just stood still, letting her decide. When her hands finally found his shirt and clutched the fabric, he exhaled deeply and wrapped his arms around her. The silence that followed was filled with everything words could never say. The wind rustled through the trees, the horses shifted in their stalls, and the stars blinked softly above them. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No confessions, no promises, just two broken souls finding warmth in the same quiet space. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know how to be someone's home." Ethan's answer was almost a breath against her hair. "You already are." She closed her eyes, letting herself believe it, even if just for that night. The sound of his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and sure, became the rhythm of something new. As the moon climbed higher, Ethan carried a sleeping Lily inside and covered her with a blanket. Emma followed, her steps light, her heart heavy but calm. When she looked around the small farmhouse, the photographs, the scent of stew and coffee, the soft creak of the floorboards, it didn't feel like someone else's world anymore. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like she belonged. Later, when she lay in her bed, she could still hear Ethan's words echoing in her mind. "Come home." They weren't just about a place. They were about peace, about being seen, about being wanted without condition. And as sleep took her, a single tear slipped down her cheek, not from sorrow, but from something far deeper, something almost like joy. Outside, the ranch settled into its familiar quiet, the sky wide and endless above. Tomorrow would come with work and sunlight, laughter and the cries of horses. But tonight, in the heart of Texas, two souls who had once lived in silence finally found something louder: love. Spring had come early that year. The long fields beyond Cole's ranch house were alive with color. Patches of bluebonnets swayed in the breeze, and the smell of fresh earth drifted through the open windows. Morning sunlight spilled into the small kitchen, where Evelyn stood, humming softly as she poured milk into a pot on the stove. Her baby, Lila, sat on the floor, banging a wooden spoon against a tin bowl, her laughter echoing through the house. Cole leaned against the doorway, watching them. He didn't say anything for a while. He just stood there, arms crossed, his hat tilted back, soaking in the simple peace of the scene. It was strange. Months ago, the house had felt empty, cold, filled with nothing but the sound of the wind. Now, it was full of warmth, laughter, and the smell of biscuits baking in the oven. He hadn't realized how much he needed that. Evelyn turned and caught him staring. She smiled shyly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You're up early," she said softly. Cole chuckled, pushing away from the doorway. "Can't let the cattle think I'm getting lazy." She laughed. "I don't think they'd dare." He smiled at that, a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes. He grabbed his hat and went outside to check the fences, but his thoughts kept circling back to her. Every day with Evelyn and her baby had started to feel like something he couldn't live without. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was part of the rhythm of his life. The sound of her voice, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, the way her baby's laughter made the ranch feel alive again. Later that day, Evelyn came out to the fields with Lila on her hip. Cole was mending a fence, sweat glistening on his neck as the sun climbed higher. She walked up slowly, her skirt brushing against the tall grass. "You've been out here all morning," she said. "You should take a break." He looked up, squinting against the light. "You sound like my mother," he teased. "Then maybe you should listen," she said, smiling. Cole dropped the hammer and sat on a nearby log. Evelyn sat beside him, the baby crawling in the grass between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with quiet, just the buzz of bees and the rustle of the wind. Finally, Evelyn said, "I used to be afraid of the quiet. It made me think too much." He glanced at her, and now, she looked out toward the hills, her voice soft. "Now it feels peaceful. Like maybe I don't have to run anymore." Cole nodded slowly. "You don't." Their eyes met, steady, warm, full of all the words neither of them had said yet. He wanted to tell her how much she'd changed this place, how she'd changed him. But instead, he just said, "You and Lila belong here." Evelyn looked down, emotion tightening her throat. "You really think so?" He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his rough fingers gentle against her skin. "I know so." That night, they sat on the porch after dinner. The sky stretched endlessly above them, painted in shades of pink and gold fading into deep blue. The baby slept inside, wrapped in a quilt Evelyn had mended herself. The crickets sang, and the warm breeze carried the faint scent of honeysuckle. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her eyes on the horizon. "It's funny," she murmured. "When I first knocked on your door, I thought it would just be a place to hide for a night. I never thought," she trailed off, and Cole finished for her, "you'd find a home." She turned to him, tears glimmering in her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear, they were from something softer, fuller. "You saved us, Cole," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "No, Evelyn, you saved me." She blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, looking out over the darkening fields. "Before you came here, I didn't have much reason to smile. I'd lost my folks, lost a lot of good men to hard years. This ranch, it was all I had left. But when you showed up that night, holding that little girl and asking for help, something changed. The house started to feel alive again. I started to feel alive again." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She could see the honesty in his eyes, the quiet strength of a man who rarely spoke his heart. He leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You brought light back to this place, Evelyn. You brought light back to me." A tear slipped down her cheek. Without thinking, she reached for his hand. He took it gently, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The world around them fell away. The wind, the crickets, the fading sunlight, all of it fading into stillness. It was just them, two souls who had found each other when they least expected it. Cole stood and stepped closer, his hand still holding hers. "You don't ever have to leave," he said softly. Evelyn looked up at him, her heart pounding. "Are you sure?" He smiled faintly, his voice warm. "I've never been more sure of anything." She rose from her chair, standing inches from him. The light from the lantern flickered across their faces, and in that soft glow, everything felt right. She could see the care in his eyes, the promise of safety, the steady love of a man who meant every word he said. When he leaned down, their lips met, gentle at first, then deeper, filled with all the unspoken feelings that had grown between them since that stormy night. It wasn't a kiss of passion alone, it was a vow. A promise that no matter how hard life had been, they had finally found something pure, something worth holding on to. When they pulled apart, Evelyn rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her cheek. "We finally made it somewhere," she whispered. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Yeah," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You're home now." Inside, Lila stirred in her crib, letting out a soft sigh before settling again. The house was quiet except for the sound of the wind brushing through the trees and the low hum of life returning to a place that had once been lonely. Out on the porch, under a sky full of stars, Evelyn and Cole stood together, no longer two strangers bound by chance, but a family born out of kindness, courage, and love. The ranch stretched out before them, endless and alive, a promise of all the tomorrows still to come.